50 years ago, I began a spiritual journey to the East. This is a very common journey. At some point, many people begin to what you might call wake up to the idea that there's more to life than their experience thus far has revealed. They get a sense that there are mysteries underneath the surface, behind the visible realm that we see. And there are many ways that happens. There are initiations, there are drug experiences, there are spiritual epiphanies, and things happen. And you suddenly go, I've not been looking at the world at all. I've seen nothing of what's really around me. Suddenly the canvas is so much bigger than your particular place in it. And you look for guidance. There are lots of places to look for guidance, but one of the common ones is this journey to the East, to go to the source of Hinduism and Buddhism, which for Westerners is so, at least in those days, so somewhat alien, and yet deeply attractive. It became very clear to me that Tibetans and Buddhists particularly were talking about experiences that I had had in the early 60s, and that they had roadmaps for it. And I was very fascinated by that. And the first book I read after this LSD trip that I've all described to you before in the 60s was the Bhagavad Gita, called the Hindu Song of God. And they talk about a cosmic reality that we don't tend to hear about in the West. And I became obsessed with learning. What is this amazing newness that I had discovered that I had never been aware of? And why had I been so ignorant? Of course, rather quickly after I began to fixate on India particularly, I became aware that the mystical dialogue that exists in the world is not related only to the people in the other side of the other side of the world. That we have great mystical dialogue in Western theology. We have great mystical teachers. And I was very fascinated by the discussion of that. Aldous Huxley, in his book The Doors of Perception, and thank you, the perennial philosophy, started to show me that this is everywhere. This is everywhere. But I couldn't ignore this pull, and so I began this trip, and I hitchhiked overland to go to India to find, if you will, myself, to find what the universe knew to be true and that I had yet to really understand. And it was an extraordinary trip overland, because I got to watch what I call the melding and the blending of cultures. I got to see that the world was not divided by these lines that we create that are city-states or nationalities, that we are one blended reality. And that was fascinating. And as I went from Europe to Asia and saw the wholeness of the fabric, I became all by myself. At that moment, I began to be aware that we were one being, if you will, one extraordinary reality. And then I got to India, and I started looking for teachers who could tell me what this was. They seemed to know so much more than I knew, and I wanted them to teach me. And they all basically said, you have to sit still, quietly, and go inward. That was the journey, inward. You had to find the meditative path to your own awakening. And I was hungry for that. But I sat down in these ashrams, and they had rules, books of rules of things you do and you don't do, what you eat, what you don't eat, don't sing, don't dance, don't have sex. I mean, it went on and on and on, and I just went, ooh, it felt alien. It just didn't feel like that was my path. But it was an extraordinary place because the world was so other for me at that point. And the most extraordinary otherness was a city called Benares at that point in time. And Benares was, which is now called Varanasi, is a city built on the sides of the Ganges, and they have what are known as the burning ghats, which is where the people go to be burned into ash after they die. And they literally line sidewalks, at least they did 50 years ago. And I remember going up to these people and going, can I bring you something? Can I give you food? Can I give you something that will help you? And they all said, cigarettes. That's all. They didn't want food. They didn't want to prolong their life. They just wanted to make it a little bit more comfortable. And I would watch these people as they died, and I saw their bodies placed on the burning pyres and the funeral pyres, and I watched and got to know the priestess of the burning ghat, a very strange woman who I was fascinated by. I got to watch all these people sitting around covered in the ashes of the people who had died, these sadhus, wandering sadhus, who were clearly, in my mind, much higher beings than I was. They knew more than I knew. They really were somehow what I wanted to become. And they had their hair piled up high and these Shiva-like sort of tridents in their hair. And I kept looking at them as like, wow, to become this person, to become someone whose whole life is spiritual. And I was really drawn to that. But I was not drawn to sitting still in India. I did not want to sit still and really, in the end, cover myself in ash. It felt like a different culture, a different world for me. And I also felt, strangely enough, that I wasn't persuaded that they knew anything. They had the dress, they had the form, they had the otherness that made me feel like there must be a step that I don't understand. But I didn't get the feeling that they really, really had it. So, as you probably all know, I didn't stay in India. I kept moving through Southeast Asia, trying to find who has this. Maybe it was the Buddhists in Thailand or in Laos or Cambodia or Japan. And I went to all these places looking. And then, of course, long story short, I ended up in New York going to Rudy's shop, 4 blocks from my house, and having navigated the world to find something that was sitting 4 blocks away, which was fascinating and mythic in some level. But here's what's really interesting and why I'm bringing this all up today. Tomorrow, Blanche and I are going back to India, and I have not been there in 50 years. Blanche has never been, which is really the reason that we're going. She has always had a hunger to go. Both of our boys have been there and have had extraordinary experiences in that part of the world. And so we are going mostly so Blanche can witness what her rest of her family has been privy to. And interestingly enough, in 1967, I celebrated my 24th birthday in Varanasi on the banks of the Ganges, just hovering over the burning ghats, and feeling this extraordinary sense of I would never be anywhere as powerful and as strange as this place. And I would just sit there. And I would watch American tourists rush in with their cameras, really at a speed that I couldn't even fathom. And they would rush out again, and they would try to get a sense of what they were looking at, but I knew they would never see what was there. There was no way to see it because they didn't move slowly enough. They couldn't stop to get it. And I had at that point stopped. And I sat there quietly, and I just absorbed the city. And on March 10th of 1967, I celebrated my birthday there. And I knew that I had somehow been informed by life. I didn't know what the lessons were, but I had been informed by life about something very great, and it's so different from growing up in Detroit, Michigan. So different. And I had learned to travel lightly. I traveled with a little bag about this big with everything in it that I needed, and a little blanket and mosquito netting. And that was all I had. And I just felt I had all I needed. I had kind of let go of the world. I had no idea of where I was going next. I didn't sense future at all. I just knew on my 24th birthday I had arrived at a foundational space. And now, it's really interesting. This was not planned. We will be in Varanasi on my 74th birthday. So it's exactly 50 years since we were in India, since I was in India. And I'm coming back with a wife, having had 2 children, having these amazing grandchildren, having had a career that never was a given. There was no certainty in that. And having found a teacher in America who took me on a journey. And the journey that I set out on in India, which is a journey that so many people go through, and you can almost document it step by step by step. The documenting of the journey to discovering who I am. And I really imagined when I went to India as a seeker that at some point I would find who I was. And that I would be blessed with the knowledge of the vastness of the universe, and I would come away knowing things. That I would attain a kind of spiritual awareness and clarity that I could then use to benefit all mankind. And it's been so fascinating for me how opposite the journey is to that. Because whatever it was I thought I would get in India was in fact delivered, but not by attaining anything, but by letting go of everything. The journey to the East is a journey not into achieving, to becoming. It's a journey into freeing yourself of everything that you think you are. It is a lifelong process of dropping off the you in your life. The you that thinks it knows, that thinks it has figured it out, that thinks it's spiritual, that thinks it has arrived at something remarkable. All of that has to go. I have to tell you, one of the things that kept happening in India was I would meet people my age or older who thought they knew, who walked around with a holier-than-thou quality, a smile that made you nauseous, permanently engraved in their face, like, I know the truth, and I am that, and I have this, and I have that. And you could feel that it was a pretense of sort. It was a projection. I remember sitting at the table with a guy who hadn't spoken in 3 years, and he would just write everything down on a piece of paper, and he would write and write and write and write and write and write. And he was noisier than anybody I've ever seen, just with his writing, his pads. And we were sitting at a table eating lunch, and he kept going. I didn't know what he was doing. It was a very strange action, and then suddenly he said, "Pass the salt." And it's the first time he spoke in 3 years. He wanted the salt, and he couldn't hold it back. And I just looked at him. Everyone at the table went. Really? Really? That's your first words in 3 years? And it was so instructive. And so many of these people in these ashrams were so drawn tight and wanting and trying and failing, and nobody, of course, got it. Because you can't get it. Nobody got what they were looking for. Everybody came there as a failure and left as a failure. Because it can't be attained. It can't. It can only be wanted, and it can only be pursued. But the devotion that goes into wanting and pursuing is purifying. It doesn't give it to you, it takes away the thing that thinks it doesn't have it. That's the miracle of the journey. The journey strips it away rather than makes it accumulative. You don't get it. You give up everything, or you make yourself light enough in the world that it can just fall off you naturally. And in the end, Rudy had this great line, you can't let go of what you haven't had. So I found myself, through Rudy, acquiring all of these extraordinary things like family, like recognition, an Oscar, the idea that I became someone and realized now I can really let go. Now I can really start to drop this stuff off. Not that you throw it out the door, you just relax and go, oh, there it was, there it is. I no longer had to go, I got it. I went, I got it. It was. Or more extraordinarily, it is. It is. There is no attachment. It just is. It took 50 years to learn to let go of wanting, to let go of acquiring, to let go of reaching, to let go of the pursuit of something that does not exist. Spiritual life is a very strange idea. What is a spiritual life? Most people think a spiritual life is something that is bigger and better than being alive as a human being. Somehow when I get to be spiritual, I will have arrived at what this is all about. And because you make it better than, other than, somehow more profound than your material life, you keep having this dimensionality struggle between what is foundational in you, which is your biology, your body, your mind, your thoughts, your emotions, your hungers, your fears, all of that, and the spiritual ideal of perfection somewhere else that will somehow create an envelope around all of this other stuff and free you. But in a way that's real, it will happen, that does happen, except that people somehow think you graduate from being human into being supernatural. And what really happens, and I have to say, this is the most extraordinary part of the journey. What you finally truly become is human. Being human is being both vast and cosmologically alert and real, and biologically, foundationally present. That dynamic is remarkable. And what does happen in the spiritual pursuit, and I've talked about this a lot, when you let go of the seeking, the finding happens. But the finding isn't something you find. Finding is that as you let go of your separateness, your individuality, you realize the thing that's been there all along, which is you are all there is. You are the totality. You are the absolute. Not separate from it, not cut off from it, not free of it. You are everything there is. That's the realization that comes. And what you also realize is that the ego-minded biological self is a molecule in the totality. It's a molecule. It's so small. You're not free of that molecularity, maybe when you die, probably. But you are one with it. You are all there is. You are the thing you've been looking for your whole life. And your spiritual journey was nothing more than realizing that. Freeing yourself of the drama and the illusion of becoming special, of becoming separate from, of becoming larger than, holier than the normal human race. It's the opposite. You become one with the human race, literally one with the human race. You realize there is no separation between this and that, you and thou. The other and you are one thing, really one. Really, not figuratively, not metaphorically. We are a shared truth, a shared reality that doesn't know itself. And the learning of the truth of who you are is what this journey is about. That's the extraordinary thing. You realize when you're looking at another person, you're not looking at another person. You're looking at another version of what and who you are. And it is so empowering, and it is so, ultimately, when you free yourself, filled with love and gratitude for what and who you are. What and who you are in the collective, not in the individual, but in the larger sense. It is so remarkable to be who you are. To be that. I am that. This is the journey. This is the journey that we're all on. It's an erasing rather than an additive. It's getting rid of all the illusions, all the ideas of separateness, and all of the vulnerability that creates inside people. Because it's very hard to let go of the protections. You know, when you're born into something that thinks it's separate. And it's reinforced in its separateness. And I watch it reinforced in my grandchildren. I watch, oh my God, they're losing the truth. But you have to lose it to find it. It's part of the human journey. We all do. Every one of us goes through this process, and that involves, for many people, the journey to the East, to find the truth. Because it's hard to find in our normal religious life. It's there. It's there in Christian teachings. It's there in Judeo-Christian work. It's there in Muslim teachings. It's there in every teaching, but it's an underpinning that you have to get through the ritualized doctrine of spiritual or religious teaching to get to the real truth that lies below it. That is a lot of digging, and not most people are given to that or even think they need to do it. So a lot of people get into this idea that they can live by the laws and the precepts of the teachings, and that will do it for them. But of course it doesn't. And if you walk around and look at the unhappiness in people's eyes, it's just because they haven't begun the journey to the East, or the journey to the source of their own religious teaching. That journey is the crucial journey of the human species. And every one of us who's embarked on that journey, and you wouldn't be sitting here today if you hadn't, has had this initiatory moment where you realized there was more. And you are on that path to more. And that path to more is, paradoxically, a path to less. Because only when you let go of your sensibility and your involvement and your physical dynamic do you start to feel and experience the vastness of your own truth. And it is ultimately a truth, and I talked about this a lot recently, that has no intellectual grasp. It is not a truth that you can at any point hold on to and say, I know. It cannot be done. It's the absolute opposite. It's, I have no idea. Because every idea limits the truth into something that it cannot be. Because it is unlimited. It is infinite. That's the experience of it. It feels infinite. For me, even to say it's infinite automatically is a mistake. Because it is beyond anything I can say. And it's beyond anything I can know. And I have come to this place in my own evolution where every truth I've ever known has gone. Everything has gone. All I know, and I've said this now week after week, is I am in the presence of myself. And that I care deeply about the self, and I care deeply in the way that it's manifested in each of you, and in this extraordinary connection, and the fact that you bring yourself to this space to connect to yourself as well. That doesn't happen in many places. It's a very special experience, and it only happens to people on the journey We'll call it to the east, but really the journey to yourself. It's a remarkable thing to be in the process of freeing yourself and in finally being liberated from you. Because you are the problem and you are the solution. And you will discover that simply by making it known to the universe that you are a serious player in this game, that you are here for the whole thing, you're committed, this is important, this is the source of your, in a sense, day-to-day drive as a person. And if it's not, trust me, the more you get old, and the more you start to see what happens to you when you get old, it becomes very clear that this was the only path that meant anything, because they're taking it away. There's no accumulation at my age. It's all going. And if there is accumulation, you're out of whack, because it's really give it up, let it go, free yourself. And it's so biologically imperative that you start to just become free. And it's so beautiful when you do. It's so beautiful. So this is the journey. And we go now to India tomorrow, and I will celebrate my birthday as someone who has given up seeking and has discovered that there's nothing to find. I will go as someone who is just walking down the burning ghats holding the hand of my wife, who was not in the picture when I was there 50 years ago, who delivered me the most wonderful children and the most wonderful grandchildren, and who has been the absolute support of an extraordinary life. I have totally awakened, sorry to make this so public, I have awakened to the reality that I could not have taken a step in this world of unfolding without standing on the solid ground that Blanche has provided me. This is an amazing thing. This is an amazing thing. And I have to tell you, it took 50 years to totally understand that, to totally realize it. You know, I have so taken my life and my wife and my children and my grandchildren and all of you for granted on so many levels. And then this thing is happening, and it's really happening as I speak, but it's been happening for months now, where I've gone, this is really happening. This is real. This is foundationally, fundamentally real. And the gratitude that comes out of that is beyond description. And I wish it for everyone, because you don't know how much you take for granted until you suddenly wake up to that fact. And then you have to walk around saying, thank you, 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 thank you. You have to do that. You can't help but do that, because you realize your life was given to you by the others who supported you, who cared about you, who arrived in your space, who challenged you, who delivered for you, who took from you. Everyone, everything that happens is your truth and your reality, and ultimately the more liberated you become, the more grateful you will become to everyone who was part of that process, and everything that was part of that process. This has been an extraordinary journey. I keep having this feeling, and I've just described it a little bit, that I would not come back from India. I don't know what that means. I have no idea. I don't know if it's biological, physical. Just worried about the food there. You know, I mean, I don't know what it means, and it gets a little melodramatic and hard to talk about. But Rudy once went somewhere to Texas to teach, and he came back, and he was also on my birthday, and we were having a gathering for all the March birthdays in New York at a restaurant called Serendipity, which was run by two students of Rudy's. And Rudy was sitting at the far end of the table, and I was sitting at this end of the table, and I was staring at him all night like, I couldn't get enough of him. I just was so awed by his dynamic energy. It was so powerful. And at the end, he came up to me and he said, what were you staring at all night? And I said, I was staring at you. And he said, no, that wasn't possible because I never came back from Texas. That has resonated with me my whole life. I don't know that I'm going to come back from India, but I also don't know who's going to India at this point. I have no idea. I just know something is working, something is happening, and that this is a poetic moment. It's a moment of maybe celebration, acknowledgement, a moment to give enormous gratitude, to look at all these guys sitting on the banks of the Ganges and go, to all of them, to understand that this idea of being burned on the banks of the Ganges and thrown into the Ganges will and somehow give you a better life next time. I don't know anything anymore. I don't know the truth of any of that. But I know they have a belief system that carries them, and all of our belief systems and all of our narratives carry us. But let me tell you, when you give up belief and narrative, you're free. Because there is no truth other than this moment. There's no truth other than what you are. And there's no way to grab it, there's no way to crystallize it, there's no ways to turn it into something other than the free-flowing, natural, ongoing, infinite, varying determinations and movements of energy that you are. And that's what I'm going to celebrate with my wife in India tomorrow. So, you know, if I don't come back, I told Blanche, just take me to the burning ghats, burn the body, and then throw the ashes in the Ganges and come home. You know, you'll be free of all of this stuff, and you know, life will go on. It will be simple. Don't bring the body back, and don't do all that kind of stuff. And you know, and if we do come back, if I do come back, and I suspect some version of me will come back, then we'll just keep this thing going, and we'll see where it takes us. And I will explain as best I can what, if anything, 50-year celebrations mean. You know. I have no idea yet, but I will find out. Anyway, thank you. Thank you for coming. I put up some pictures on the wall over there of my grandchildren, and I did it because I talk about them all the time in this class, and nobody knows who they are. And also probably people don't even know who Blanche is. So if you don't mind for a minute, I'm going to just do this. This is Blanche, everybody, right over here. Right there. That's my wife. And I love her, and we are going to India together. And these are, my pants don't fall down when I walk. Excuse me, I'm so sorry. These are my grandchildren. It's Talia on the top, and Elijah on the bottom, and I love them to pieces. And they have been a source of extraordinary fulfillment in this lifetime. Thank you. So, having said all that, thank you for listening to this. I know this is an awkward way to end. I love you all. I don't know where this goes, but anyway, I'll be back in 3 weeks, and these talks will continue when I get back. Bye bye.